But today we observe a small tribe akin to a group of meerkats that gather together atop a small mound to watch, question, and discuss the current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, and what a collection of meerkats we have with us in this episode, dear listener. I, of course, am Trevor, aka the Iron Fist, looking to live up to my name tonight as I do battle. With me, as always, Scott the Velvet Glove.
G'day, Trevor. G'day, John. G'day, Joe. G'day, Liam. How are you all? And how are the listeners?
Yes, there are more of us. Joe, the tech guy's here. Good luck, Joe, maintaining all this tonight.
It'll go swimmingly, I'm sure.
Yes. Also, we've got Liam. You might remember Liam, dear listener, who debated successfully, ultimately.
He did not successfully debate me. He has got me to change my position for 2 electoral terms, and I just hope and pray that the Labor Party actually picks up on it and moves slightly to the left.
That's my definition of success. Welcome back, Liam.
I'm pretty happy with that definition as well. No.
Yeah. And also in his car with the windows wound up so as to reduce road noise is John, Dire Straits John, who you might see in the chat room previously on different occasions. So John's going to join us as well. Welcome aboard, John.
Thank you, Trevor. I'm happy to be convinced either way. We'll see how we go.
Yeah. So guess what? We're going to talk about The Voice. Dun, dun, dun. Because it's coming up, isn't it? And we've been holding off.
14th of October.
Yeah. And Liam reached out and said, Trevor, I think there hasn't been quite enough pushback on some of the ideas you've been putting forward. And so Liam's put his hand up as the devil's advocate yet again, or just, no, well, not, you actually, you're going to be a yes voter.
Yeah, I'm at this point, I'm pro yes. Yep.
Yep. So Liam's going to put the yes side forward, and we're going to just see where things go. I've got a mountain of notes that we can fall back on if the discussion falters, but yeah, we're going to talk about The Voice. So without any further ado, if you're in the chat room, say hello. And Liam, do you want to kick off with your thoughts, having listened to the bits and pieces I've said over time, and where I'm not giving enough weight to something, perhaps, or I'm just totally wrong on something, or something I've missed, or just give us a bit of a spiel, Liam.
Yep. I think maybe I'll try and just summarize what I feel is kind of the reasons why I'm a yes voter, and then maybe we can. And that's, I think, I've got, 4 succinct points in front of me, and then we can delve into more detail as required. So starting off, point number 1, I think there's a sort of a time element to this. So while there may be issues that you have with it, this is the opportunity we have. And if not now, it's sort of been mentioned that it's not going to be for another 2 terms. I think at least that sort of something like this goes up again. And during that time, we'll still continue to have sort of poor results for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So there's an opportunity we have at the moment, and while you may have problems, this is kind of a good opportunity to see some results, I feel. Secondly, I think the putting it into the Constitution is required, basically, we've had the historical dissolution of all the previous bodies. So ATSIC, then it was the NAC, the NAC, second NAC, ATSIC, and the NIC have all sort of been dissolved at different points. And one of the biggest things I think we need is sort of continuity and support. Just the different programs need to be stood up, administered, and then continued for a period of time, and possibly adapted to provide support to bridge the gap effectively. I think we've talked a lot on the podcast, or you've talked a lot on the podcast about sort of being a racist proposition. I think it is a racist proposition. I'd agree with that. I think it does separate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people out and confers upon them a very small right And I think we should emphasize that it is a very small right. So they'll be able to make recommendations to Parliament, but will have no actually hard power. So the key here is that they'll have a voice and they'll be there and be consulted on issues that affect them. And I think that's been lacking in the approaches the government's sort of had so far. Also, like a sort of sub point on that one is, given the way that sort of lobbying and sort of money is affecting our politics at the moment, I feel this sort of levels the playing field a very small amount to some of our most disadvantaged people.
Yep. Hey, I'm just going to interrupt briefly, Liam. Just when you turn to the right, your mouth goes right over the microphone, which then gets all breathy. So just put the microphone a bit more to the right so that you're not breathing straight into it, because it was just getting quite breathy. But sorry.
No, that's
keep going.
Good comment. I'll move my notes to the right.
Perfect.
Perfect. And then the final point, I don't think we can sort of just call them out as any other sort of low socioeconomic group that can be sort of assisted by our standard programs. I think they're sort of distinct and different enough that we need to look at them and administer culturally appropriate programs to assist them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's the sort of crux of my argument. 4 points, and we can go from there.
Yeah. Yep. I guess initially I would say this is a balancing act depending on the priorities you have in your mind, and different people will weigh things up differently. So other issues we talk about, like nuclear submarines, I can pretty much categorically say that if you're in favour of those, you're just wrong, right? But this is one which will depend on your life experiences and your thoughts about different things and how you prioritise things. So I guess it's one of those ones where I'd say it's a judgment call of weighing things up, and I don't particularly begrudge people, or I don't know, begrudge is the right word, but I certainly can understand how people come to the yes vote, and I can understand how people come to the no vote, and I can see how people get there each way, and I understand that. It's not crazy in either case, is what I would say. So, so first off, urgency of this. Things need to be done to address poverty, particularly for Indigenous people in rural and remote communities. It doesn't have to be done through a voice. We could be implementing programs today to do stuff. So there's no reason why things can't be done without a voice, for example. So to me, almost urgency might be a reason why not to have a voice, because that's just another body that things are going to potentially go through. So it's not as if things have to be done through a voice to get things done. So I don't see the urgency argument as compelling.
I would have thought it is probably urgent because, Marcia Langton's not getting any younger.
But it's urgent if you want to pass the voice, but if you want to do something in Indigenous communities, that's a different matter.
I understand that, but what you've also got to understand is that the voice is still yet to be designed by the Parliament, still yet to be implemented by the Parliament. This is just making a part of it in our constitution that they could then rely on and that sort of stuff if they ever wanted to sue the government for not actually setting the voice up. The voice is also only something that is a what's the word I'm groping for? Is only something that is giving advice to the government, which they are more than able to ignore if they so desire. So I don't think we're going to end up in high courts or anything like that. I don't think it's going to clog the courts with arguments of, you didn't listen to the voice, so we're going to sue you. It's just something that has been worked through. It was put together with the Uluru Statement, which was a gathering of, a few hundred people and that sort of stuff. And yes, 20% of them didn't want to sign up to it. I do agree with that. But 80% of them did want it. So I would have thought if it's something that they have actually asked for, then it's something that we've got to actually grant them.
Can the
If you said to
government,
any if you said to any group, here's some special stuff,
Yeah,
do you want it?
but what's
What group
sort of,
is going to say no?
Yeah, okay, but what's the sort of special stuff they're going to get out of it? All they're going to do is have an advisory body and that sort of stuff that's going to filter everything through this one body that's then going to talk directly to government. And
can the government ignore it?
yeah, absolutely, they can.
Of course they can.
The government can ignore it.
I think
This has led to arguments
probably will.
And this has led to arguments from the No case and that sort of stuff that are saying that you'll end up with the same problem that you had in Canada, where I can't remember what it was called, but their voice is what it amounted to. Was ignored by the government, so the government found themselves in court, and it's only just been ruled on by whatever their high court is, saying that the government can ignore the advice if they wish to.
I think it's abundantly clear that our voice will be able to do the same thing. So I don't think we're going to end up in the court.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have an issue with that.
I think the largest mechanism is A, that they contribute to the discussion, and then B, that in the event of the government ignoring their advice, there is capacity for there be a spokesman or the media to actually run with that. So
exactly.
Voice, we got to say we suggested A, and they did not take that advice.
Which is something that could be argued in the court of public opinion, but I don't think it's going to end up in law courts or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it's a special right of lobbying.
Yeah.
Is essentially what's being offered.
Which is my concern.
Which is not really a big problem because they're not getting paid for it.
Well, Scott, my problem is to do with the treatment of different categories of people based on race. So the problem is, all right, the actual right being granted ultimately probably isn't going to be particularly powerful, although I wouldn't mind being able to sit in Parliament with Parliament's forced to be my audience while I tell them what I think should happen in the world.
And get a pretty penny for it as well.
Well, we're not even sure if they're going to get paid for it, though, Joe.
Scott, companies pay a lot of money for lobbyists to go into Parliament and make representations.
Yeah.
So it's not insignificant power to be able to have that access to people and to put forward your case.
Yeah, okay.
It is a right of some significance. Now, sure, the Parliament could ignore it, but it's genuinely a right that is going to be given. And the point that we're going to get to eventually is that this is not a right that everyone's been given.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a right that's being given to a particular cultural group.
I think
Indigenous people.
And that is the only problem that I've got with it. Now, Liam was talking about the culture group and that sort of stuff. And my hair on the back of my neck went up when he started talking like that because, culture is not something that we have to respect. It's got to earn our respect. And there hasn't been a hell of a lot of the cultural practices of our Indigenous brethren that I think deserves any sort of respect.
I think it's a very tough point of view in terms of their cultural practices. We've kind of been as a dominant culture and basically wiped out their whole population, then exploited their labor.
Yeah, I agree.
They weren't allowed to vote. And then,
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
And then at this point, we're saying, their culture is not something to be respected when, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of alcoholism and issues with their.
Yeah, I don't think. Alcoholism is part of their culture. It's
no, but what are you pointing out as parts of their culture that need to? They shouldn't really even have to justify their culture to you. I feel like they should be able to exist peacefully in their own sort of world, and they shouldn't have to sort of be absorbed into ours.
Yeah, so then you got the problem. Then you also got the problem that you're going to.
Okay, so that's a good point to just repeat that again. That they shouldn't have to sort of
justify their existence, or justify their cultural practices significant to you to be able to practice them.
Yeah. Yes, and shouldn't be absorbed into ours.
No.
Is that right?
No,
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm totally like I've heard previous arguments.
Yeah. Okay. So then you're going to have the situation like they have in the Northern Territory, where it was years ago now. There was a case where there was a guy that was convicted, was accused of rape and that sort of stuff, and they said, "I will handle it." So he was speared through his leg, and they said, "Well, that's it. It's over now." Rather than the cops getting involved in that type of thing. Now,
So, go ahead, John.
I was going to say back to when you were saying about access and whether or not to get paid or not. The Aboriginal people don't get the same access that religious groups and big company get, and that's through money. So maybe this is a way for Aboriginal groups to have some sort of voice up there that the power and the money has been able to get solely before.
Okay, I'm conscious that we're chopping and changing here, so I want to run through to the end of some of these rabbit holes before we move to another one. Just back to this comment, because it's a crucial one, is about being absorbed into our culture. John, I promise you we'll come back to that. Hold that thought and bring it back. But one of the things I find in this, Liam, is that we're talking about closing the gap. And what is often measured there in terms of the gap is education levels, health levels, wealth and income levels. These sorts of, how many doctors do we have that are Indigenous? How many Indigenous people have a degree, a PhD? How many are in the middle class, upper class? And so one of the things that we do with figuring out whether we've closed the gap is measure Indigenous people by their success in our society. So if we're going to say Indigenous people don't have to merge into our society and take on our culture, then how can we then insist that key criteria are matching up? And how can we be surprised then if we don't have the same number of doctors, lawyers, teachers? Because if we're saying to people, keep your own lifestyle, do your own culture, you don't have to merge into ours, but then we start measuring things about how well they've done in typical features of our culture. I'm okay with saying you don't have to merge, but then you have to acknowledge that the counting criteria is flawed. The assessment criteria isn't going to make sense. You're on mute? Is it? I can't hear Liam.
No, neither can I. No, still can't hear you.
What's going on?
You must have muted it.
Oh, there's a little button on my... Is that back?
Yes. Yeah, you're back.
Accidentally muted myself. Okay, so, yep, in terms of that, I think, tend to agree with a few things there and maybe disagree on some. So I think the criteria that we're measuring by are inherently sort of our cultural criteria, and that ideally in a perfect world they wouldn't just be absorbed, and that would be, but they will realistically need to integrate into our culture somewhat. I think before, when I was talking to Scott, it felt like they're having to justify their existence and their culture to even exist, right? Which I feel is like fundamentally wrong.
Well, I don't think they need to justify their existence to us. They exist. It's and on the 26th of January, I'm very much with them. I think we should change the date. It is a it's celebration of invasion, really, is what it comes down to. So I think we actually got to change that.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's something else that's going to be down
diverging again. But I'll try and stick to Trevor's argument. I think. Go on, Trevor.
No, I think you kind of agreed with me, didn't you? That
in some senses,
it is an issue that if you're not going to
I think
to join into the Western culture, everything needs to come to the
table a little bit, right? Like there is going to be some assimilation. There's not like we can draw a line in the sand and they exist over there, and like we're far past that point. I'm just making the point that they should be able to have their own culture and have a sort of quality of life similar to that of the Western European kind of people on the continent. But yeah, that will involve some integration. So
won't it disappear though, Liam? Sorry, Liam. If you're bringing up the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander level of what do you call it, the general quality of life, won't that make Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders more like us, to put it bluntly?
Well, I think, there's
and
going
leave
to
the
be
culture
some level of
behind.
assimilation. I think, there's going to be an overlap of culture, and probably over time, would they be sort of realistically distinct or not? I don't know if you went far enough into the future, but I think for like right now, they should be able to exist as sort of have their own practices and cultural norms and things, and not have to do exactly the same way that we do. And then, sorry, I'm sort of losing my track here, but I feel the argument from Trevor, right, is that
I'm basically saying that if you're not aiming to bring Indigenous people into the modern Western lifestyle in Australia, and if you're wanting to keep them in a traditional Indigenous lifestyle in a remote town or area, then it's really unfair to expect these key criteria to match up, is my point. And so closing the gap is a problem if people are not going to assimilate into our lifestyle to a significant degree, because otherwise you just can't expect.
Well, I think there's probably
those
a few
things to match
metrics,
up.
right, that you could probably highlight as, they could be culturally distinct and then still not have what they have. So like, the lower life expectancy, ideally you'd be able to live in your own sort of ways, but have a similar life expectancy. You'd also expect to not have such a high proportion of their youth sort of locked up behind bars. So they're kind of two key issues, I think, that are issues at the moment, and that, they can have, like in a healthy society or a healthy sort of culture town, exist with their own culture, but not have everyone, going through the courts and being locked up in juvenile facilities.
But don't something like 90% of Aboriginal people live in suburbia? Aren't they already essentially assimilating?
So there are,
and
yes,
losing the cultural?
There are some. So I think we're probably talking about, there is different groups here. There are probably people assimilating living in sort of suburbia. There's probably low socioeconomic groups that are probably more remote and, where there's large issues. So yeah, it's not all they're not all the same.
I mean, there's an emerging middle class of Indigenous people, and I'll take a punt that they're living in urban areas.
Well, technically, I'm one of them.
So,
Aboriginal in my community.
Yeah. So, my point is, if we want Indigenous people to join the middle class, we probably need to get them out of remote communities where there's nothing to do. There's a whole range of social problems that come out of that living condition, and it's an unrealistic expectation that people could live in those communities with nothing to do, with a social welfare system that's going to prop them up, and not have drug, alcohol, violence. So I'm just sort of caught your point about assimilation, if you like, or expecting Indigenous people to adopt Western lifestyle. And I'm saying I don't expect them to if they don't want to. It's just don't complain if the metrics don't add up to the same as an urban lifestyle of other Australians.
I would agree to that, to the point. Like if you want to live a life out in the bush hunting game or doing something, I would probably not expect you to have the same life expectancy as someone sitting in metropolitan Brisbane living a fairly cozy
Yes.
life with all the access to healthcare. However, I would think that there are certain metrics that should be closer than they are. So the ones I pointed out.
Yeah, for sure. So, circling all the way back to the beginning about urgency as your very first point.
Yep.
It's urgent to get the voice passed in the sense that if it doesn't happen this time, it's not going to happen for a long time. But if you disagree with the voice, then that's not an argument for the voice. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
So
Well, it's more
what is
probably
urgent?
saying-
What is urgent is helping people out in particularly remote communities, and that can be done without the voice. So
No,
urgency.
isn't that going to? Is it going to end? Isn't it going to end up then, Trevor? It's going to be a top-down approach where government decides what's good for you and that sort of stuff, and they'll chuck money at it.
Well, that's what it is now.
Yeah, I know, which is exactly what they're complaining about. Whereas if you give them a voice and that sort of thing, if you actually listen to them, then you might actually find out that the programs could be better targeted. That you could have.
Have we not been listening?
I don't think we've been listening to them. No.
How do you know that?
Well, I don't know that, but I'm just looking at it. I'm just looking at the results, and I think to myself that
So the results are poor.
yeah.
Because we have not been listening.
Um.
That's your evidence for us not listening.
No, I don't
We
know.
haven't been consulting. We haven't when major
I
decisions.
would
have
agree with that
made-
statement because
we
you've had
haven't-
different commissions.
Yeah, my biggest argument along those lines is I think there just needs to be continuity. So there was the 4 different bodies that were stood up and disbanded, and then maybe.
I'll get to continuity.
But if you-
It's on the
if you
list.
Well,
If
yeah,
you actually-
along this point though, we're
If
talking.
you put it into the Constitution,
No,
then the Tories
let's just-
can't come in and just scrap it. Like they did
No,
with
but
Brexit.
but Scott, you said we haven't been. They haven't had a voice.
Yeah, okay.
They haven't been
right.
consulted. If we ask them what they want, then something might be done. And my question to
Well,
you is:
how many of them?
how do you know that people have not been consulted?
Well, I don't know because I'm not part of that group or anything like that.
Have-
however-
when I've looked at reports
Mhm.
on different things, like I looked at one because we spoke a few weeks ago about what was it? It was the income management issue in the Northern Territory with social welfare cards and things like that. And one of the things that strikes me about these inquiries is the enormous level of stakeholder engagement of going into communities and seeking opinion from people on the ground. That's what strikes me with a lot of these big decisions.
Yeah, okay.
is-
But I,
is-
But how many of them were consulted for the intervention and that type of thing?
I think, well, on Trevor's current point though, I think
Mm.
there is consultation, but then there's also continued sort of improvement, which is I think then goes back to my point about continuity. We need to have
Can I-
programs, and they need to have the
Oh,
time and space to change and see what works,
Yeah.
and then properly
Can I
implement.
poo-poo something
for a long
Trevor
period of
just said then about
Yeah.
consultation?
Mm.
As you know, I am in the party, but any politicians in such a bubble, when they talk about consultation about anything, it's very rarely coming from the people. It's always coming from whoever shouts the loudest. There's no continuity or politicians hearing what needs to happen at the top.
Well, I can just say that on some of the major decisions where reports are done, you can see there's an enormous level of on-the-ground consultation to work out what's going on.
I think that-
And we've got people in the parliament who are Indigenous. So just, there is this notion put forward that they haven't had a voice. But, most cultural groups are a department, say education. The education department's going to make some changes and to religious instruction or whatever, They'll go outside and consult with groups like Queensland Parents for Secular Schools, the various religious groups, get their feedback and then report to the minister and
then
make a
totally
decision.
ignore it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the normal process of government, is to the department going out and reaching out to stakeholders. So the Indigenous example has been a little bit unusual in that within government, there has been 5 different commissions set up by government to say, we're going to give you some help here with giving us stakeholder feedback. So we had 5 that, and then there's a history of them failing and being disbanded. And
I think
here we are
Julia's
with
got a point
nothing at the
there,
moment.
isn't it?
So,
That ALP usually set them up and the Libs tear them back down again. Is that an argument for the yes vote to keep one of them going?
So you know, my point is that stakeholder groups are normally outside of government, and departments would go out to them and consult. And we have had a series of different groups funded by government working like ATSIC, actually delivering government programs. So it's just a furphy to say for the last 40 years we haven't been listening at all to what Indigenous people have to say. And it's as if there's some secret solution that if only we'd had the voice, we would have been able to tell the government, oh, here's the silver bullet, or here is 10 silver bullets that never got acted on because nobody listened to us. But I've yet to hear what these things are that never got up because nobody was listening. And if I was running a campaign for the Yes campaign, I'd be saying, right, tell me concrete examples of things that have been missed because we didn't have the voice. And if we had it, then this would have been different. And I haven't heard one.
Look, I'm not in the detail of individual programs, but on your point about consultation, I think the biggest issue is there's consultation possibly, but whether it's actually listened to or not is probably the bigger issue. And then,
I agree with that. I agree that it may not have been listened to, but the first part of your sentence was there's probably been consultation.
Yeah,
and there's no guarantee that the voice is going to mean it's going to be listened to.
But yeah, this isn't like a black and white thing, right? Like if we have the voice, it doesn't magic bullet solve all our issues.
Yeah.
If we do have the voice, though, there is a continuous just part in the government that can keep relaying these messages to government that this should work or this won't work, and we can keep improving.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to overcoming inconsistency of regularly disbanded bodies.
Yep.
All right. So that's an advantage that you see in this proposal. And look, there's no doubt that it would mean there'll always be something because there's just got to be.
I think I know where you're heading with this. It might be one dude in a shed in the NT, or it could be a full-blown body across the country. It
requires money.
Yeah.
If Tony Abbott or somebody like Morrison, or somebody who just doesn't like the idea of it, gets in, it's so the proposal is so vague that there's no compulsion for a massive infrastructure to do the job properly. So if funding's not provided, then the whole thing just could be just a useless shell of a voice. There's no guarantee that the government will fund anything of significance by this. It could be, as you say, a handful of people in a shed, if it's a government that is of that mind.
I think there's probably 2 points I'd say on that. So the first is if the referendum passes, then that would be a sort of strong indication from the people that this is something that they want, and it would be unpopular for a government to go in and sort of cut the whole thing to shreds. The second part is that look, it's not a perfect solution, but it's probably the best that we can do, given we've had bodies stood up and taken down, and then this gives at least some level of permanence. So yes, the Libs could trash it the next time they get in government, sure, but
Yeah.
that's impossible to stop.
Yeah. So I've said my bits on urgency and overcoming inconsistency, and you've also said that, look, Indigenous people have issues that are different because of location and culture to other poor people, I think is what you're sort of getting at. Am I right? That
Yeah, I
they
would
therefore
say
need
that,
a special body to deal with their peculiar circumstances. Is that kind
when you're designing a program to assist any sort of group of people, if they have distinctive characteristics, then you need to have the program work along those lines. So,
See,
yeah.
and without a voice, there's nothing stopping a government.
No, it's
Getting that
again like
opinion.
we're like wrapping around on, like, you in a perfect world you can do all these things, but the problem is that they'll probably take longer than 3 years or maybe 6 years, and then when the Liberals get in and they just pull the pin on the program, that just
The
stops
voice
the
isn't
progress.
going to change any of that.
didn't you think that?
Like these aren't. Yeah, what I'm saying is this is not the silver bullet, but it is a chance to make progress.
Political pressure might, Trev.
Yeah. So there is the element I was talking about before. So it's a referendum that passes. So there is some political pressure not to just gut the whole thing. But yeah, look, if you were a government that didn't want to help Indigenous Australians, then of course there's avenues for you to just gut the entire thing and throw programs out the window and shift blame onto the body, which I think is what I read in one article was happened with ATSIC. So like, there are avenues where as a government you could tear it all down.
Yep. So it might do something, but it doesn't. But my point is, by its very nature, it doesn't solve any of these problems. It might just add a little bit of weight to make it a little bit more embarrassing to shut down an Indigenous commission. But these people are beyond embarrassment.
So your argument now is verging into the it doesn't go far enough. So like we're doing too little.
No, because I'm saying it's a balancing act, and I'm saying that the benefits that are obtained from the voice are, I consider, small, and then we get to the negative of the racism aspect.
Okay.
And so what I'm previous 38 minutes was about, in my mind, the benefits aren't as strong or as good or as powerful as people think. And on the other side, I have an issue with the inherent racism in the proposal, which I think outweighs it. So it's not a case of saying it doesn't go far enough, which did need to do more. It doesn't add much, and the problem is it comes attached with this other big disadvantage of racism. So,
but what is can you explain the racism part a bit more? So I feel like there's the racism brand, which seems bad, but this is positive racism, basically. I would sort of liken it to. So, but also very, very mild positive racism, giving very mild powers to a small part of the population who historically we've done absolutely horrendous things to.
Yeah, so it is a form of positive racism. The problem with that is when you open the door to saying it's okay to provide special rights based on cultural groups, then your argument to deny other cultural groups special rights starts to fall away.
I think this
so
is
when a Christian
slippery slope kind of thing going on.
Well, hear me out. When a Christian see when last 8 years we've spent railing against Christians wanting special privileges, who say we're different because of our culture. We need to group together so we can only employ people as math teachers who are Christians because we're special. And my argument, the first thing that I think of with these issues is we all have the same equal rights. You Christians are not special. You have to work in the same system that we all have to work in. And if you start saying cultural groups can have different rights, then you can no longer maintain that argument. You are saying, well, you can have different rights for different cultural groups if it's a positive thing, right? And
I would say it's
so,
a positive thing in a very rare exceptional circumstance, given the fact that it's sort of over.
yeah. And you know what? If 99, 90, 85, 80%, if 90% of Indigenous people were poor and disadvantaged, it was so close to 100%, you thought it just doesn't matter. It's like Indigenous equals poor and disadvantaged. Then I'd be inclined to say, okay, let's just say all Indigenous people need these special rights because they're all disadvantaged, but they're not. There's a burgeoning middle class and upper class of Indigenous people. There's a spectrum of success and disadvantage in Indigenous communities. So I'm all about helping people who are disadvantaged. And dear listener, if you've tuned into this and you've never heard this before, triple, quadruple the amount of money that goes to poor Indigenous communities. Fine with that. But you just have to make the distinction that people should get this money and advantages and help because they're disadvantaged, not because they are part of a cultural group. You need to look within that. And the problem with The Voice is it's ignoring class. It's saying that Indigenous people, as a cultural group, will get these particular rights. And I have a real problem with that. And so I accept that my emphasis on equal rights is maybe higher than other people because of my experience with religion and what I think of that in particular. And it's just me. And other people may say, yeah, that's not such an important thing. Can live with some good racism, and I don't care about these arguments. But I do. And so I prioritise that, and that's my judgment that that's more important than the other factors that we've just talked about.
Yep. Look, I can understand all that. I would say that I don't weigh that nearly as highly as you seem to. I also don't see the sort of slippery slope of us undermining our general premise of how we operate through sort of giving the okay to this one voice. So
yeah, can I say that I think Marcia Langton, in a previous form, an earlier format, kind of agreed with me on the importance of this to some extent. So I'll just go through some of my notes here a little bit, but we had an expert panel on recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the Constitution 2012 and a joint select committee shortly after that. And in an article where and so this is in 2013, 2015. And they were saying, what should we do to recognise Indigenous people in the Constitution? And what they came up with at that point, after consultation, was let's get rid of the race provisions in the Constitution and let's put in a section that recognises the history, that Indigenous people were here first and that they suffered. And that was the proposal that came out in 2012, 2013. Recognition of Indigenous culture and people and their history, and removing the specific race provisions in the Constitution. Now, that I could agree with. Not a problem. all perfectly fine. When people say, "Oh, this changed the voice, it's about recognising people," I say, "No, it's not. It's more than that. We've moved beyond what was proposed in 2012, 2013. If they had stuck to that proposal, the referendum would get up, because it doesn't have a racist element to it." And people would say, "Fair enough, that's history, and yeah, let's get rid of race from the Constitution." And Marcia Langton at the time wrote an article basically saying, we need to get race out of the Constitution. It shouldn't be there. And we should move to a situation where we're just talking about being Indigenous is just an interesting little sideline, and it doesn't make who you are. And what's important is let's look after disadvantaged people. Like, that's what she was saying back then. And it's Noel Pearson and the Uluru Statement that introduced the idea of the voice. And that's the one where your average Australian, who's not a racist, I mean, there are racist Australians, of course, but the people who are voting no in this referendum are people who are saying, I think we all should be the same. I think we should treat people equally. I don't think I'm special. I don't think anybody else is special. I think we should all have the same rights and just help out poor people. That's what people are objecting to, the idea of racial categorization and division. The irony in this argument, the debate in Australia has been appalling, in that the no voters, well, the yes voters are accusing all no voters of being racist. And you could be, as in my case right now, if you understand the argument, dear listener, is you're trying to be as race blind as possible. That's the issue. And these people are being accused of racist. So if they'd have stuck to the original 2012, 2013 idea without introducing the voice, it would get up.
But would that make a difference, Trevor?
No, none of this makes a difference. No, there's nothing is going to make a difference, because ultimately nobody's able to deal with the hard, uncomfortable truth in this whole thing. So none of it's going to make a difference. It's all window dressing.
I would disagree with that. I think it can make a difference. If you had a body that's set up and listened to by the government for a continued period of time, then it could make a difference.
Why hasn't it made any difference in the last 40 years?
Because they tore it apart.
They tear everybody down. Like no body's lasted. I don't know what's the longest duration of any of one of the four.
ATSIC.
And then also, you get Liberal governments which have been fairly dismissive of the Indigenous peoples.
We had the NACC was from 1977 to 1985. We had ATSIC for 15 years, 1990 to 2005. So none of these.
I'd have to go into. Well, I have to do more research into how these bodies functions, what programs they ran, and then how much they were funded and listened to by the government. But
but what's the policy that's been missing, that the voice proponents say we needed this and we didn't get it because we didn't have a voice? If only we'd had it.
No, you're not disputing that they haven't had a voice at different points in time.
No, the idea, the policy. Like, the whole point of this is there are ideas that Indigenous people have about how to improve the lives of Indigenous people. And the reason that we have not been able to do something is because nobody's been listening to us about these ideas.
I don't think that's...
Not just listening, it's about putting them into positions where they can sort of control their own destiny.
But the voice is about nobody's listening to us. That's the crux of the voice. is nobody's listening. We need a voice to tell Parliament stuff. And I've yet to hear the argument that says, like A, B, C, and D, if only you'd listened to these ideas, we'd have been somewhere different by now.
I think it probably goes down more to sort of like lower level, like smaller programs in different communities. Like they're all not homogenous.
Well, this, that is true. So one of the things out of, particularly with the income management program, which the reports I was reading, which was sort of post the event and interviewing people afterwards as to what they thought, it was split 50-50 in these communities about whether they thought it was a good idea, the income management, or not. And so one of the things to come from it was different regions have different desires and wants and needs and circumstances. And so yeah, in fact, if that is correct, and if there's a spectrum of answers to things, quite often the role of the voice would be to say, you know what, in this community we should be doing A, B, C, and in that community D, E, F, and this community over here is completely split. It would be hard for the voice to make a recommendation on income management if they looked at the results in some communities where it was 50-50 and they'd go, well, some want it and some don't. A lot of the reports are showing that regional solutions are what's needed. I don't know that a central body in Canberra is necessarily the right place to start if regional answers are the solution.
But they're also saying that there's a certain number of those representatives who've got to be from the regions, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah,
that's true. That is true.
Yeah. And there's also different levels of different levels of government for different things. So the federal government could be mainly around sort of divvying up funding and, which programs continue to go ahead or which don't, and making fairly high level decisions, but then really pushing down the majority of money and, autonomy to lower levels.
Yeah. But you know what? All the money in the world for people in remote locations with nothing to do.
Yeah, you need to fix the root cause of this issue, which is nothing.
Herded into tribal groups who just fight all the time. Then all the money in the world doesn't solve that problem. Some of these problems are actually insolvable without dislocating people from the land, and nobody's going to do that.
I wouldn't say that. I think that's they're more creative. Like you can start up businesses, or you kind of need to give people meaningful things to do with their life. So whether I'm not sure exactly what that means, but there's surely got to be mechanisms to do that without taking them away from wherever they are.
I don't think you can just set up a business out there though, because you end up with the problem that you're not going to have clients or anything else. Now businesses only prosper where there's clients, and what Trevor's talking about is a very remote area where there's 5 or 6 people living. So you're not going to be able to get a very large customer base from 5 or 6 people.
Yeah, and I think
unless you're doing right? some sort of
ultimately that's why I see it as hopeless for remote communities in there's just no solution to bring those people and bridge the gap.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very hard to do that.
While they continue to live in those areas. And they're the ones who most concern me. And ultimately what's required there is cultural evolution, where we say, you know what, there's some parts of culture that were great 300 years ago, but are just not going to work in the current environment. So if you continue this way, it's not going to be successful in the metrics that we measure for closing the gap. It's just impossible. And the sort of people who are going to be in The Voice are unlikely to recommend cultural evolution, because to me they seem like people who are in the industry of maintaining Indigenous cultural purity, and they would perhaps be the last people to give up on culture.
They don't need to give up on culture. We're talking about sort of an evolution.
Give up on a significant part of it, the land component, the attachment to land.
Yeah,
that's a big part of it.
And also, I agree with some of your points around, like, it's going to be almost impossible to, education and living standards for people out there. I'd point to the bigger problems being, the communities that are in sort of semi-metropolitan areas. I don't know, what's it, Townsville or something like that, where there is sort of like a youth justice issue. And we've got 90% of Indigenous kids being in juveniles. 90% of juvenile kids being locked up are Indigenous. So they're things that we can actually bridge the gap on, and aren't these sort of very rural issues that you're talking about. And I think you'd probably, if you really wanted to be clever with the stats, you'd maybe make some allowances for things like that. So you could probably segment the Indigenous population by the people living in non-remote areas, and that would be a far more fair representation of the stats. And I don't know if they do that or not. But, was that, sorry, John?
Sorry, mate. Maybe that's where The Voice could help, pointing to areas like education, especially, and juvenile detention, all that sort of thing. I think education's the key.
Yeah, education's a big one, but also just it's a whole span of issues, right? Like, you've got kids that have parents who don't have a purpose and are struggling with their own issues, and then you've also got poverty, putting them out on the streets or not enough food, and then you've kind of got boredom, and then education as well, not being in schools and things like that. So there's no one simple solution to the sort of youth justice issue faced by Indigenous people.
As long as you don't end up going down the road where that woman that was arguing for the... what was she arguing for, Trevor? She was arguing that they should have education in their own language rather than English.
Well, amongst a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that would.
Yeah, was that a couple of episodes ago?
No.
Yeah, I wasn't
4 or 5
particularly involved with whatever suggestions. I think everyone needs to come to the table a little bit. It's
Well, I don't know that I've got a lot of pressing other bits to say about it. I mean, have you, Liam? I mean,
no. Look, I think if I were to summarise our positions, I think you weigh the rights element quite highly, whereas I don't value it nearly as much. I think that I would feel more inspired that this is actually an opportunity for change, rather than I feel you are quite cynical of the process being a mechanism that will actually help. I think they're the two main things that I feel we sort of disagree on. Was there another one?
No, I was. I did mention just briefly that Marcia Langton, after that sort of 2013 period, was quite happy with just a more modest proposal, which was, let's get rid of race and let's just recognise history and suffering and put it in the Constitution. I think that would be fine. People would have been on board with that. My emphasis on downplaying race and upplaying class disadvantage, I think is, Now, that's just personally me compared to you. But I'm not alone in that some of the great American black activist thinkers were along the same lines in many cases. We've mentioned multiple times Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I think I previously mentioned Franz Fanon and Amira Baraka. I mean, these are people who are making comments like, let's stop talking about race and deal with it. It's a class issue. And that's how American black activists moved. Our black activists have not moved in that direction yet.
Look, I can see the pros of that argument. I just think that, yeah, I feel that this is such an opportunity for change, and that I feel that it's also such a small right that's being granted, that it's just a body that can, have a voice. And I feel that kind of is something that's also quite heavy in how I've sort of judged this. They're really asking for so very little. And we don't seem to even want to be granting that. So yeah, I've listened to the previous episodes on and heard those arguments. And maybe if the race thing was more prominent in this for me, I just don't think it really is that prominent. They get a small body that can have a voice to Parliament, and then hopefully it can do some good. It's kind of where I sit.
I'll let you finish on that highlight if you like, Liam.
Highlight, lowlight, who knows?
See, dear listener, I don't have to get the last word in every time.
He says getting the last word in.
Well, should we have a show of hands? Who's planning on voting yes?
I'm still undecided.
Still undecided.
Well,
John, we couldn't get you to make a decision after.
Well, I certainly agree with both of your points a lot. I'm really worried about that, what I term as identity politics aspect of it. The people who are allowed, because I'm Aboriginal in my community. Yeah, 2 of my sons are Aboriginal community, 2 older ones aren't. So does that mean 2 of them could get on this commission and 2 couldn't? That worries me.
I don't know. I don't think they've actually said.
That's what it means.
I don't think they've actually. I don't think they've actually said what they're going to do to actually say. Are they going to do blood tests to determine whether or not someone can vote?
Yeah, I mean that's the bit that worries me and leans me towards no. The bit that leans me towards yes is that I think all these commissions that have been there in the past, we're basically getting run down from the get-go. They only lasted as long as they did till somebody got in with enough power to just dismiss them. So if a voice gets in, maybe there will be more access to Parliament, which is going to help things along a bit.
Yeah, which is, I know Trevor's made the whole point about there being lobby groups and that sort of stuff. Considering their history and all that type of thing, would it be such a bad thing if the government actually gave them a lobbying arm straight into the halls of power?
It certainly would be more power than what. Like I'm a member and quite heavily involved in my local Labor branch. Yeah. And I can tell you the voice will get them a lot more access than members do. I was arguing with our local New South Wales MP on Monday before last at our branch meeting, and they're quite happy to continue on LNP policies because it's convenient for them, and all their local branches are screaming at them. But we're not getting anywhere with it.
Democracy. Liam, I've got a nickname for you when you come on next time. You're the Scott Whisperer.
No, I was leaning towards a yes vote right from word go. He's not Scott Whisperer. And he's only got me to vote for the Greens for 2 terms just to hopefully kick the Labor Party in the pants so they actually start to behave themselves again.
Yeah, I'll
All
come
right.
back in 2 terms, Scott, and we can have another debate. Get you another
Yeah.
2.
All right. Well, I'm gonna call this done and dusted for this episode. I'm gonna look for another topic where Liam can convince Scott to change his mind.
No, he has not convinced me to change my mind. Jesus fucking Christ. I cannot believe that I'm now going to come in here and justify my position to you, Trevor.
I'm just joking, Scott.
Okay, fair enough.
You told me you're already a yes.
Yeah, I know.
So
Mm.
yeah.
Maybe next
All right.
time, Trev, we can go on. I can push back a bit about Poles and Ukraine. There's the other 2 that I'd love to push back
Oh,
on.
now you're tempting me.
Well, I
Let's
think,
get
if,
another
I think
hour
if you
now.
were to come on here, John, and argue with him about Ukraine, you're going to have me supporting, you're going to have Joe supporting you, and
Yes.
you know,
How's
it's
that?
just
How's that counter-offensive going?
the counter-offensive is actually starting to make some progress.
Oh,
But
for
it is
God's
very,
sake.
very slow because they are trying to take out some heavily fortified areas. So it's
Apparently,
actually
they are
got to the-
now within striking artillery striking range of the main supply route
Mhm.
going down to the crime area. And as soon as they can move artillery up there, then the war changes quite significantly.
So my issue is in the middle. I feel, Trev, that you think that Russia was justified in invading. Is that true?
They were provoked, and
I know,
they
yeah,
told
but that-
everyone what they were going to do,
That's
and they
very different. Though.
and,
Being
and they
provoked,
did
Yeah.
did what every other superpower would do.
yes.
yeah,
but
but
was
don't
it
you
right?
think we should?
Do you think that was justified?
Justified? Tricky word.
So every other
And that's-
superpower would
Tricky word.
steal the children, take them back
Tricky
to their
word.
own country, and give them to their childless citizens.
Can we just stick with the invasion to start with?
All right. So the invasion is that's where I'm in the middle. I agree with you, Trev, that America is everything that
Was-
you say they
was-
are. All right.
Was NATO justified in invading Kosovo?
No. I don't think any major power is justified installing their ideals on other countries.
But according to what we were talking about the other week, arguably, it was the people in those areas wanted to be part of Russia. So what you've said
Yes, but
isn't necessarily the case.
yes, but then it comes back to, like every pseudo invasion that America's done, was Russia justified in taking some of the population who wanted to be with Russia and doing a full-scale invasion of a whole country?
If the majority of the population wanted to be in Russia, is anyone justified in stopping them?
No, but I don't think you can get.
No, it's
No.
totally different. You can't justify
no.
an invasion for anything. I'm sorry, you can't.
Hmm.
In '92 they had referendums, and every province had a majority that wanted to be part of Ukraine, including Crimea. Crimea was one of the highest.
We went through the polls that puts all that into question.
And that's the other part that I disagree with you. Polls, you can have a poll to answer anything you
Well,
want.
you just used one.
No, they
Like-
had a referendum. That's a big difference to a poll.
Well,
That's a
my main
really big
point
difference.
is the main point with Russia is, and the Ukraine is, the Ukraine has to give in.
And they're not going to.
Whether you think
No chance.
it's justified or not doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's what's done is done. What matters is what do you do, and it's criminal what they're doing in just sending young and now middle-aged and old men in to be blown up in a minefield.
But you
for no
can't point
good
the
reason.
finger straight at Ukraine with that, without including Russia, because they're doing the same thing.
Well, blame both then.
Well, then you
there
have
is-
to
I mean,
blame that. You can't-
nobody's innocent. Nobody's innocent, and all sides are to blame. How's that?
Definitely, yes. You
Yeah,
can't just
good.
say Ukraine should sue for peace right now.
So
That's
can I
just
say all
unrealistic.
sides? Can I say that all sides are at fault?
Yes, definitely.
There you go. There we go. I'm happy with that.
Mm.
But I think Ukraine has to give in
No, they
and
won't.
concede.
I'd say that.
Well, they
No,
won't. But
this is-
do you think they should?
No, I don't think they should.
So you got any sons? You got a
No,
son?
no. That's not the point. The point is,
No, it is the point. It is precisely the point, John, that young men are being sent to a battlefield where there is no hope of victory and they're getting slaughtered.
yes, but
And
equally on both sides. Russia invaded, so they're sending their young men in.
No, the point is, yes, but the point is
and
Ukraine
against their will.
is throwing young men
Mhm.
against machine guns in the same way that the British told our boys to get out of the trench and start running towards those machine guns.
There's a big
And we
difference
said at the
is they're
time-
defending their own country. That's a huge
No,
difference.
the big thing about it is they're both hopeless wastes of life that they should be
Yes.
ashamed of for continuing.
Yeah, both sides should be ashamed. But you can't say,
And-
as soon as Ukraine sues for peace, all right, then, okay, yes, we're going to save lives now. All right.
Yes,
But Russia wants the whole
Live
of
to fight.
Ukraine.
live to
They're not
fight
gonna-
another day.
Um,
You live to fight another day.
And you'll have another war in
You-
10 years' time.
You may well do, but guess what? You get 10 years to regroup
Yeah, there's
and you
more
get to
people die.
save lives.
Yeah, but you got 10,
No,
you got
man.
10
Not
years.
an
You
answer.
got
Don't
10
know
years. That gives the Russians 10
You don't-
years an opportunity to get themselves set up for it too.
You know what
Yeah.
should happen? Everyone in favour of this should grab their 21-year-old son and put him in the tank and send him off with a kiss.
So you misunderstand me.
And
I'm
then
not in
tell me-
favour of it.
No, you are. You're
No, I'm
telling
not.
me that they should keep fighting. I'm telling you the Ukrainians should stop, and you're saying they should keep fighting. You're saying more young men should be sent into a hopeless battle.
Well, you're calling it
I'm
hopeless.
saying it is a hopeless battle.
What's your evidence for that?
Even
The evidence is the line's not moving.
It is
It
moving.
is.
But
The Russians have fortified that line. It's not moving. It's not worth the cost of human life to regain some territory so that you can call it Ukrainian territory. It's not worth it.
it's not worth it for you, but it must be. I think it must be worth it for them because their
It's not
country is
worth
being
it to-
invaded.
It's only no. It's not worth it to. It's easy for the people in charge to send young men in there if they're not their young men. It's easy for people to sit back here
Mm.
and say Ukrainians should fight to the last Ukrainian and they shouldn't give up.
Mm.
Well, it's not them who are actually doing the fighting and the dying.
So if someone was
It's
invading
really
Australia,
easy to
then
say.
so if someone invaded Australia for whatever reason, take out the illogical
If-
of it.
if-
So if someone
Don't worry
invaded
about-
and took over the top half, we could just
Yeah.
sue for peace and say, all right, you can have that top half now.
Yes, if there was a trench
Wow.
line, heavily fortified, that invading forces had set up, and it was a hopeless situation to try and breach that trench, then yes, I would say, let's give up, regroup, save our men, and live to fight another day. And if I was in Ukraine, you don't need the hypothetical. If I was in charge of Ukraine, I'd be saying, let's not try and breach this. Let's regroup, and we're going to have to settle a new
So
border.
when the Nazis invaded Western Europe,
Mm.
the UK should have just said, "Okay, that's it. War's over. We'll sue for peace."
Well, they had a chance of winning. The Ukrainians don't.
The Ukrainians do.
I think that's a
They don't
problem
have a
that the
chance.
Ukrainians do. Yeah.
They
They
don't have a
do.
chance. It's hopeless.
Well, but it was hopeless as day one of the war. They were going to be invaded. They were going to be overrun within a matter of days.
No, it was worth fighting then. I'm not saying they shouldn't have been fighting then, but now that this line's been established, heavily fortified,
And it's been
now
broken.
it's-
It's been broken,
They've taken
yeah.
Robotyne.
No, it hasn't. There's no successful counteroffensive.
I think you're misjudging it, Trevor, because it's one of
Yeah.
those things. a war's not over in 90 minutes. A war takes a very long time to get moving and that sort of stuff. When the breakout actually happens, then you will see either a very successful Ukrainian counteroffensive or a very successful Russian invasion.
What would you say if in 12 months' time it's apparent the line never shifted to where we're talking about
If it was
today?
in 12 months' time, then I'd actually
And
then I'd be
another 5,000 young Ukrainian men have died
Mhm.
between now and then. Would you just say, "Oh, that's a shame"? Got that wrong? Gosh, sorry.
Don't know. I don't know what I'd say, but I think to myself, if the line hasn't shifted in 12 months' time, then I think then he's at that stage, then he's actually got to throw in the towel and say, look, and go to the bastard in Moscow and say, right, you can keep what you've already taken, but you're not going to take any more.
What do you
I think
say to all those Ukrainian women who have lost their sons, brothers, husbands, fathers between now and in the next 12 months if the line doesn't move
Well, I don't.
and they're wasted?
I don't think you can actually argue that the line hasn't moved.
No,
It has
I agree
moved.
with Scott there. And you can't also say, it's like World War One. Everyone was going to keep the war going while they thought they could win. As soon as Germany realised that they couldn't win, the war was over. And it'll be the same here. As soon as one side realises that they can't win, then it'll be over. At the moment, both sides think they can win.
Yeah, I if I can jump in, I don't follow this a hell of a lot, but I'd say I'm kind of on board a little bit of both. So I think there's a shocking loss of life, which is terrible, and I also very much object to sending people to war generally from the political arm. So,
Me too.
but I also do feel that if the Ukrainian people do want to try, then they also do have a right to try breaching the line if that's what they want to do. But I wouldn't like the idea coming from on top. So I think ideally everyone needs to opt in. These are the odds.
I think it should be Zelensky versus Putin. Bare knuckles, fight to the death. Winner takes all.
Yeah.
But the point being is that at some point the Ukrainians may not want to roll over and just take it. And they may want to make a stand, and it might result in a shocking loss of life. And they probably have the right to do that if that's their choice. But yeah, they need to make the choice around whether the sacrifice justifies the outcome.
Soldiers on the front line are not given a choice. They're arresting people in Ireland to extradite them back to the Ukraine.
Okay, well,
because they're saying to the European countries, they're writing to the citizens and saying, well, to the countries and saying, this Ukrainian citizen is there in Ireland, and we want him back here in the Ukraine because he's got to fight.
There are also troops on the ground in Ukraine fighting for Ukraine, raising money so that they can keep going.
Of course, I'm fairly sure that my Russian friends, given the choice, would be there in the front lines fighting against Putin.
Your Russian friends would be fighting against Russia.
Yes.
Right.
Why don't they? Because they know what it's like to live under Putin.
Why don't they?
Well,
because they find themselves getting shot.
Right.
Well,
don't want to volunteer for the Ukrainian army.
Well, yeah, but it's not their territory.
I'm fairly certain there's a lot of Ukrainians on the front line who don't want to be there.
Possibly.
In every war, that's true.
Yeah.
That's one of the shocking things about war, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if that's the case, then I think that the Ukrainian should stop. If people don't want to be there and don't want to sacrifice a lot of men against a line that isn't currently budging, then
and the ones who don't want to, and the ones who do want to be there have potentially been fed a whole heap of bullshit propaganda about how we're just going to win next week when all this other stuff arrives, and they wouldn't even know. They're just relying on their superiors who are telling them, spitting them a line to say, 1 more week, guys, 1 more week. Anyway, look, you know what? A year from today, Leon's birthday, 12th of September, 2024, let's just revisit where the line was and where how many lives were lost in the meantime and see what people think. But anyway, that's that. And there's one other issue, John. While I've got you there, you said something about polls. My love of polls or my reliance on polls.
Yeah, it seems in recent episodes, the last 6 months or so, you've really come to pointing out a lot of polls. Now, I just think polls in general don't have much credibility. Well, the one, if we go back to the voice one, all my boys are all under 30. Not one of them until recently knew that there was a referendum on. None of them ever would answer a phone for a poll. So there's no credibility in that poll, I think. It's only grasping a minority, and you've already just got to ask who is conducting the poll and what answer that they want. So I just don't see polls, for years as having any credibility.
All right.
I can take a punt at that. I think,
Go on.
so polls are becoming a little bit more reliable from the fact that nobody has a landline anymore, and so it's very hard to take representative statistical samples, but they are representative and a good indication. So I wouldn't hold it as gospel, but they are an indication of what's going on. So, like, you'll see, and like, your point's valid. Well, there's a lot of people who don't know what's going on, but you ask them questions and you structure the questions very carefully, and they can provide an indication of what's going on.
I'll be interested to see how close to the polls the actual referendum is. Either way.
Yeah, it's not looking very good at the moment.
No, I think it's going to be lost.
Yeah, I think it's going to be lost as well. So there goes my argument about polls.
Well, next time I raise a poll, you can just look at the chapters in the podcast and skip it and go to the next section, John.
Okay.
You like the polls?
I like the polls, Trevor. Bit of data's good.
Yeah. Okay. On that point, we're done and dusted. We're going to go. All right. In the chat room, it's you've been making your comments. Good on you. Next week, episode 400. We'll do a bit of a review of things, I think.
Holy
That's what we'll do.
400.
Yes.
What the hell have I done with my life over the last 6 years?
Devoted to the noble cause of podcasting, Scott.
Yeah, apparently so.
I
yes.
reckon 400 means 8 years, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. But Scott went walkabout.
That's true.
Too. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I've been around for more than half of those now.
Yeah. Right. Very good. Okay, I'm going to go. Got to call it off. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks, John and Liam in particular. Everybody says good night. We'll talk to you next time. Bye for now.
Yeah, it's a good night from me.